This weekend, I'll be the color analyst for the Morgan State North Carolina Central broadcast at 6 p.m. Eastern Time in Baltimore, Maryland. And you can watch this football game at ESPN3 and ESPN3.com. Be sure to order your copy of the Go-Go Offense by Coach Brennan Marion on footballgameplan.com/GoGo Offense. Coach Marion goes through the ins and outs of his explosive offense, one that's tearing up the college football field and putting a lot of points on the scoreboard. Again, you can order your copy at footballgameplan.com/GoGo Offense.
I'm Mike Abuchalam, and this is your football game plan Big Sky Conference Whiparound for Week 4. The number 8 ranked Montana State Bobcats extended their winning streak in Week 4 with a comprehensive victory over Norfolk State. The ground game was the key asset to the Bobcats' home victory, with the three backs, Lane Summer, Shane Perry, and Logan Jones, all went over 100 yards on the day. Two of them, Summer and Jones, each had out a pair of scores. The Bobcats also tried out a new quarterback, Tucker Rovig, whom coaches wanted to test out if needed later on in the season. Week 5 will see a visit from Northern Arizona. There must be something going on in the state of Montana because both of their Big Sky teams are off to a 3-1 start atop the conference. The 19th ranked Grizzlies defeated Monmouth 47-27 at home this week after dominant showings from quarterback Dalton Sneed and running back Marcus Knight. Sneed threw for 334 yards, 4 scores, and an interception. Knight ran for 138 yards and a touchdown in an impressive showing for the offense. With conference play beginning in Week 5, the Grizzlies will travel over to California to face UC Davis. Speaking of those Aggies, they're one of 5 teams in the Big Sky that are 2-2. This week, they fell to North Dakota State Bison on the road. The offense had a poor showing after putting up 41 points in Week 3. Jake Meyer threw 3 interceptions at the Fargo Dome, 2 of which came late in the ballgame as the Aggies tried for a fourth quarter comeback. Week 5 will see the Aggies welcome Montana, whose 3-1 start have them feeling good. Portland State bounced back from the drubbing they took in Week 3 with a dominant display of their own, with the 59-9 victory over Eastern Oregon. The Vikings defense completely shut down all of the weapons for the Mountaineers while their offense exploded. After quarterback Davis Alexander showed out with 366 yards and 5 scores in the air, 2 of his backups, Jalen Chapman and Nathan West, also came in to throw touchdowns of their own. The Vikings will look to continue their offensive momentum next week when they travel to face Idaho State. Though their offense continues to put up numbers, Northern Arizona fell once again on the road in Week 4. This time it was to the Illinois State Redbirds. The Lumberjacks are going to need to get steadier outings of their defense as their unit is letting up 31 points per game. That will be tough to do as arguably the best team in the conference, Montana State, is up next. Week 5 will be a big test for the Lumberjacks. Idaho and Sacramento State are the other 2 teams at 2-2 thus far. With their 2 losses coming to FBS teams, the Vandals should be feeling good about where they stand, especially since their offense averages 38 points per game against their FCS opponents. Next week, they travel to face Northern Colorado, who's sitting at last place in the conference. The Hornets are in a similar standing, with their losses coming to FBS teams. Only their offense is putting up 63 points per game versus the FCS. This week, they face the struggling Eastern Washington Eagles. Weber State, Cal Poly, Southern Utah, Idaho State, and Eastern Washington all have losing records through Week 4. Weber State welcomes a Northern Iowa team that took Big 12 power Iowa State to overtime in Week 1. Cal Poly takes on Southern Utah in Cedar City, with both teams having only 1 win. Which team will notch their second win? Eastern Washington has to wait till Week 6 for conference play, as this week they take on North Dakota at home. Rounding out the conference is Northern Colorado, sitting at a lowly 0-4. They need to focus on being 1-0 next week when they take on Idaho at home. I'm Mike Abuchalam, and this has been your football game plan, Big Sky Conference Whiparound.
Week 4 in the Big South is come and gone. Before we get into Week 5's action, let's take a look back at the weekend that was. Number 7, Kennesaw State went on the road and knocked off Missouri State 35-24. The Owls trailed by 9 at the half, but came out of the break and scored 3 rushing touchdowns to take their first lead of the day. Isaac Foster finished the game with 183 yards on just 8 carries and had touchdown runs of 75 yards and 67 yards. Bronson Rettsteiner had 221 yards on 10 carries, including an 85-yard run. The Owls finished the day with 479 yards to Missouri State's 93. Monmouth fell on the road at number 19 Montana. The Grizzlies outscored the Hawks 26-13 in the second half of their win. Kenji Bahar finished with 34 completions on 50 attempts for 393 yards and a pair of scores. Lonnie Moore IV caught 7 passes for 104 yards and a score, while Terrence Green Jr. caught 8 passes for 99 yards. Charleston Southern lost at the Citadel in the battle for Charleston 22-13. The number 25 ranked Bulldogs held the Buccaneers to a pair of field goals before Jack Chambers found Garris Schwarting for a 27-yard score in the fourth. Chambers finished with 92 yards and a TD through the air and 94 yards on 8 carries on the ground. Wide receiver Cameron Brown had 6 catches for 118 yards in the loss. North Alabama lost to number 10 Jacksonville State 30-12. Christian Lopez had 252 yards through the air on 21 completions for the Lions. He connected with Andre Little for a 15-yard score in the third quarter. Jacoby Bird caught 8 passes from Lopez for 85 yards. Hampton lost to former Big South foe Liberty on the road 62-27. The FBS Flames led 41-12 at the break in a game that was never close. For Hampton, DeAndre Francois completed 19 of his 25 passes for 288 yards and 3 scores. Francois had TD passes of 28, 25, and 53 yards. Jadakiss Bonds had 8 catches for 144 yards and 2 scores in the loss. The Campbell Fighting Camels escaped with a narrow victory over Davidson, 31-29, to hand the Wildcats their first loss. Campbell led 28-14 in the fourth, but 2 late touchdowns from Davidson pulled the Wildcats within 1. After the second score with 23 seconds left, Davidson went for 2 and converted. 17 seconds later, the Fighting Camels got within field goal range, and Colin Gary connected on a 50-yarder to cap off the day. Haj Malik Williams finished with 236 yards and 3 scores through the air and added a score and 41 yards on the ground. The Presbyterian Blue Hose scored all 10 of their points in the first quarter in their 35-10 loss at home to Eastern Kentucky. Jarius Jeter finished with 58 yards on 10 carries and a 21-yard score in the loss. Eastern Kentucky outgained Presbyterian 452-224. Gardner Webb was blown out on the road at Wofford 49-10. James Ellis II caught a 15-yard pass from Jordan Smith for the Runnin' Bulldogs' only score in the fourth quarter. Kalen Withlow finished the day with over 200 passing yards in the loss. Let's take a look at the updated Big South standings with the first conference game beginning this week. Kennesaw State is at the top at 3-1, with Campbell right behind them at 2-1. 2 teams sit at 500, with 2 more tied at 1-3, while both Presbyterian and Charleston Southern remain winless. 0-3 Presbyterian is on the road at 1-3 North Alabama on Saturday, the first Big South Conference game of the year. The Blue Hose have struggled offensively through the first 3 weeks, managing just over 243 yards per game. This may be the week for them to figure things out, as the Lions allow over 415 yards and almost 35 points per game. After an exciting win at home over Davidson, Campbell hits the road to take on Mercer. The Fighting Camels are led by their dual-threat freshman quarterback, Haj Malik Williams, who has over 550 passing yards and over 130 rushing yards through 3 games. Mercer has lost 2 in a row and allows over 440 yards per contest. Kennesaw State hosts NAIA Reinhardt University this weekend. The Owls are now ranked 6th in this week's Stats FCS poll. Kennesaw's 518 yards per game on offense is the 4th most in the FCS, and their defense is allowing just over 14 points per game, the 10th fewest in the country. That will do it for this week in the Big South. Come back next week for all the results and more. For the FCS Conference Whiparound, I'm Frank LaSala.
It was an interesting week in the CAA. Let's take a look into some of the games. 12th ranked Maine gave Colgate another loss. Ernest Edwards returned 2 kickoffs for touchdowns to lead the Black Bears to a 35-21 victory. Colgate is 0-4 on the season with 3 of those losses to the CAA. 22nd ranked Elon got destroyed by Wake Forest 49-7. Quarterback Davis Cheek failed to reach 100 passing yards, and the Phoenix defense gave up 351 passing yards along with 5 passing touchdowns. 20th ranked Delaware survived an upset scare from Penn. Down 21-7 in the third quarter, the Blue Hens scored 21 straight points to take a touchdown lead in the fourth. With just over 2 minutes left, Penn took a 69-yard punt to the house. Instead of kicking the extra point to tie the game, they went for a 2-point conversion to take the lead and failed. Delaware won 28-27. Albany embarrassed Lafayette 36-7. Quarterback Jeff Undercuffler threw 4 touchdowns to 4 different receivers in the win. Second-ranked James Madison easily beat Chattanooga 37-14. Running back Percy J. Obase took 19 carries, 114 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the win. William and Mary faced off against East Carolina. Both offenses only got into the end zone 1 time, but the Pirates kicked 4 field goals, and the Tribe fell 19-7. New Hampshire took down Rhode Island in a conference matchup 27-24. Jason Hughes kicked a 29-yard field goal as time expired to give the Wildcats the win. Quarterback Vito Priore completed 28 passes for 312 yards in the loss. Stony Brook dominated Fordham 45-10. Seba Neckett took 20 carries for 182 yards and 2 touchdowns. Isaiah White added 132 yards on the ground on 12 carries. Finally, in the most exciting game in the CAA so far this season, 18th ranked Villanova continued their impressive start and upset 5th ranked Towson in overtime. Nova quarterback Daniel Smith threw for 4 touchdowns and ran in 2. Justin Covington took 27 carries, 194 yards, and a touchdown. Towson quarterback Tom Flacco threw for 304 yards. He also added 110 on the ground with 2 total touchdowns. Yeedy Thanrat ran in 3 scores in the loss. Maine's Ernest Edwards was awarded with FCS Stats Special Teams Player of the Week. Edwards scored on a 100-yard and a 95-yard kick return in the third quarter and broke his own program record with 198 kickoff return yards in the team's win against Colgate. The senior now has 6 kickoff return touchdowns in his collegiate career. In the rankings, James Madison remains at 2nd. Villanova flies up 10 spots to 8th after their upset win this week. On the losing end of the upset, Towson drops from 5th to 10th. Maine stays at 12th, Delaware holds on to their spot at 20th, and Elon falls to 24th. We have an action-packed slate of games this week in the CAA. 20th ranked Delaware takes on FBS's Pittsburgh. The Panthers' biggest strength is their passing game, which is ranked 25th in the FBS. Defending the pass just happens to be one of the Blue Hens' biggest weaknesses so far this season, ranked 105th in the FCS. Richmond has been successful on the ground, ranking 46th in the nation. Luckily, they'll take on Fordham, who ranks in the bottom 15 in rushing defense. Expect a defensive battle when New Hampshire takes on Duquesne. The Dukes have a higher ranked defense coming in at 9th, with the Wildcats coming in at 35th. However, New Hampshire is giving up less points per game than Duquesne has. On the offensive side of the ball, UNH has a slight advantage, ranked at 87th as opposed to 90th for the Dukes. Second-ranked James Madison goes on the road to take on 24th-ranked Elon in a conference matchup. James Madison is ranked that high for a reason, as they have a top 10 offense and a top 25 defense, coming in at 8th and 21st respectively. Elon is a balanced team, but the 68th-ranked offense and 79th-ranked defense will have to play better than they've been if they want a chance to win this one. In what could be an offensive battle between conference rivals, Albany hosts William and Mary. Both teams' strong points are their offense, specifically their rushing offense. The Great Danes are ranked 31st and the Tribe are ranked 39th on the ground. Once again, 8th-ranked Villanova will take on a tough conference opponent when 12th-ranked Maine comes for a visit. Can they continue their amazing start to the season? The Wildcats have the 6th best rushing attack in the nation, while the Black Bears have the 8th best passing attack. One thing Nova has done strongly is control the scoreboard. They score 42.3 points per game, 8th best in the FCS. They also have held their opponents to only 19.8 points per game, which is ranked 21st. If Maine wants to win this game, they'll have to take advantage of a secondary that's ranked 102nd in the nation. 10th ranked Towson goes on the road to the Swamp to take on FBS's 9th ranked Florida Gators. It's a tough matchup for quarterback Tom Flacco. He leads an offense that is scoring 40 points per game, 11th best in the FCS. However, he goes up against a talented Gators defense that's only giving up 11 points per game, which is 11th best in the FBS. Finally, Stony Brook takes on winless Rhode Island in the Seawolves' first conference game. They come in with a 12th ranked offense, 8th best in rushing. The Rams have really struggled this season. Their defense specifically has given up 37.3 points per game, which is 101st in the nation.
What's going on? I'm Zachary Morgan. Here's what happened in the Ivy League during their first week of play. Princeton dominated Butler in their first game of the year on Saturday, 49-7. Senior quarterback Kevin Davidson looked sharp after getting the starting nod, going 18 of 21 for 341 yards and 2 touchdowns. Junior running back Colin Eady carried the ball 9 times for 59 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. DeLon Stallworth added 8 tackles and an interception on defense. Overall, the Tigers just outclassed the Bulldogs, ending the game with a 543-274 advantage in total yards. Princeton will play on the road at Bucknell on Saturday, kicking off at 3:30. Yale kicked their 147th season off strong on Saturday, beating Holy Cross 23-10. The Eli's ground game was strong on Saturday as the team totaled 276 yards on the ground, with junior running back Zane Dudek leading the way on 96 yards and a TD on only 19 touches. Senior quarterback Kurt Rawlings went 19 for 27 for 193 yards, adding scores through the air and on the ground to keep the game out of reach from the Crusaders. Head coach Tony Reno called this game a gritty win when describing it. Yale will look to carry the momentum gained from the win into next week's game when Cornell comes to town, opening a 3-game homestand and the Ivy League play for the Bulldogs. The game will kick off at 1 on Saturday the 28th. Senior wide receiver Drew Estrada went and had himself a monster game at Dartmouth's season opener in Jacksonville on Saturday, gaining 235 all-purpose yards and scoring 2 touchdowns as the Big Green crushed the Dolphins 35-6. Estrada caught 6 passes for 104 yards and 2 touchdowns and added 79 yards on 3 carries to lead Dartmouth in receiving and rushing on the day. He also added 52 yards on 2 punt returns. Quarterbacks Derek Kyler and Jared Garbino each had 2 touchdown passes on the day. The win gave Dartmouth their 10th consecutive victory on opening weekend. They will play their home opener next week when they host the 0-4 Colgate Raiders. They'll kick off Saturday evening at 6. The Harvard Crimson played their inaugural game of the season on Saturday against the San Diego Toreros in San Diego. The Crimson were forced to take the field without one of their captains, senior Wesley Augsbury, as he was inactive as he served his 1-game suspension for the controversial helmet-to-helmet contact penalty from last year's season finale against Yale. Last year's leading rusher Aaron Champlin and wide receiver Tyler Adams were both inactive on Saturday and will remain inactive for the rest of the season as the juniors are currently not enrolled in classes. They are both expected to return to the team next fall. Harvard would ultimately fall to San Diego 23-31 and will look to bounce back next week as they play their home opener against Brown, kicking off Ivy League play for both squads. The game will kick off at 7 p.m. on Friday night. Junior Boston College transfer E.J. Perry got the nod at quarterback for Brown and went on to have a huge day, gaining 183 yards through the air and 227 yards on the ground, while being involved in all 5 of Brown's touchdowns en route to being named Ivy League Offensive Player of the Week. Brown will attempt to win their first Ivy League game in 2 seasons on Friday night when the team plays Harvard on the road. The game kicks off at 7. The Penn Quakers lost their season opener at Delaware on Saturday in a close one, falling to the Blue Hens 27-28. Senior quarterback Nick Robinson went 18 for 27 for 193 yards with 3 passing touchdowns and an interception. Running back Kerrigan Brooks led all rushers in the game with 158 yards on 28 totes. Penn will look to bounce back on the road next week against Lafayette on Saturday at 3:30. The Cornell Big Red kicked off their 2019 campaign this past Saturday when they took on the Marist Red Foxes. Cornell's defense suffocated the Red Foxes all game, holding them to just 2 total rushing yards on way to a 21-7 victory. Senior quarterback Mike Cantonese took a majority of the snaps under center on Saturday, going 15 of 20 for 130 yards, adding 79 yards and 2 scores on the ground. Senior running back Harold Coles had his 6th career game with over 100 rushing yards, going for 127 yards with a touchdown on 16 carries. Cornell hopes to keep their momentum rolling as they open up Ivy League play on the road at Saturday at Yale. The game will start at 1. Sophomore tailback Ryan Young powered the Columbia Lions to a 31-14 victory against St. Francis Red Flash, taking 9 carries for 98 yards, including a 65-yard touchdown scamper in the first to open up the scoring. While the Lions did win, questions emerged at the quarterback position after junior starter Josh Bean was ineffective throughout the day, going 11 of 22 for 78 yards with an interception. After the INT, the reins were handed to sophomore Ty Lenhart, who fared slightly better, going 5 of 9 for 101 yards. Despite the passing woes, however, the Lions ended the game scoring 24 unanswered points. They will look to keep it rolling next week in their home opener against Georgetown on Saturday at 1 in the afternoon. For your Ivy League Whiparound, I'm Zachary Morgan.
4 games in the MEAC this weekend. Delaware State heads to number 17 North Carolina A&T. Bethune-Cookman visits Howard. Morgan State welcomes in North Carolina Central, and FAMU heads up to Norfolk State.
The Howard Bison under new head coach Ron Prince had a lot of NFL scouts flocking to the nation's capital this spring to check out their talented wide receiver Jaquez Ezzard, who entered the season on the Senior Bowl watch list. But with Ezzard out with an injury so far this season, it's been another senior wideout that has the scouts buzzing, and that's Kyle Anthony. The 6'3", 205-pound Miramar, Florida native has been a starter since arriving on campus back in 2016, possessing strong hands and the route-running savvy of a 10-year veteran. Anthony has been one of the more consistent players within the program and in the conference as a whole. He's a 3-time All-MEAC performer and currently leads the team in receiving with 29 receptions, 305 yards, and 3 touchdowns, averaging 76 yards receiving per game. If he keeps his pace up, Anthony will find himself playing in a postseason All-Star game and on Sundays next fall. I'm Emory Hunt, the czar of the playbook, with your MEAC Whiparound.
Welcome to Week 5, as the Missouri Valley solidified its status as the best conference in the league as it pulled off a 5-game clean sweep of the Big Sky Conference to win for the 3rd year in a row the Big Sky Missouri Valley Football Conference Challenge Series. Proudly taking a look back at last week's games, as Indiana State, behind their defense, beat Eastern Illinois. The Salukis came up just short of beating their 2nd FBS team this season in their loss to Arkansas State. South Dakota's defense dominated in their win against Northern Colorado. Number 14 Illinois State, behind their quarterback Brady Davis' career-high passing game, beat Northern Arizona. Northern Iowa, after a sluggish start, came back to beat Idaho State. Number 3 South Dakota State scored on offense, defense, and special teams on their way to victory against Southern Utah in the 53rd Annual Beef Bowl. And finally, in a game that was everything as advertised and more, the number 1 Bison showed the league why they are number 1, as they came up with 2 crucial interceptions in the 4th quarter, including 1 on the goal line, to hold on for victory against number 4 UC Davis. Looking ahead to this week's game, it's pretty quiet in the conference as there are only 2 games on tap, as number 22 Penguin Nation looks to remain undefeated against Robert Morris at the Igloo. And what a way to end this year's Big Sky Missouri Valley Conference Challenge Series, as the number 9 Panthers travel to Ogden, Utah, looking to upset the number 5 Wildcats of Weber State. Now it's time for this week's Conference Players of the Week. Offensive honors goes to Illinois State quarterback Brady Davis, who threw for a career-high 419 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Defensive honors goes to Northern Iowa defensive lineman Ellerson G. Smith, who had a career-high 3 sacks, along with 9 tackles, including 3.5 tackles for loss and a forced fumble. And special teams honors goes to Illinois State kicker Sam Fennelson, who kicked 4 field goals and 4 extra points in the Redbirds' victory. For the Missouri Valley Conference, I'm Brian Sullivan.
Are you ready for some exciting NEC matchups this week? Mark Allen exploded for 168 yards and 2 TDs as the Dukes defeated Dayton by a score of 35-31. It wasn't just Allen in this one, as Daniel Parr threw for a pair of touchdowns and ran for 1. Duquesne travels to New Hampshire to face the 1-2 Wildcats, who are coming off a win against Rhode Island. The Dukes hope Allen's success can continue in this one. Also look for Parr to try to exploit a Wildcat defense that gave up 312 yards through the air to Rhode Island. St. Francis started strong against Columbia, but ultimately couldn't keep up with the Lions as they dropped this one 31-14. Their scoring stopped in the first quarter after putting up their only points of the game. They host 0-4 Bryant, who were edged by Brown. Even though they lost, the Bulldogs show that they have talent with quarterback Corey Curtis throwing for 404 yards. While Nisivachia played well, it was receivers Anthony Frederick and Hunter Hill providing the excitement. This should be an exciting NEC contest if both teams have offenses that can put points on the board. While the Red Flash seems to be going with a running back by committee approach, Bryant has been relying on Edibaboye to carry the load. In LIU's highly anticipated first NEC matchup, the Sharks lost to Sacred Heart 34-10. LIU was not able to contain Marchie and Chestnut in this one, as Marchie threw for 375 yards and 3 touchdowns, while Chestnut ran for 161 and 1 touchdown. The Sharks traveled to Wagner to take on an 0-4 Seahawks team that's been beaten handily by Florida Atlantic. After a strong start to the season, Dimitri McKenzie has been held to only 10 yards in the past 2 games. Will the Sharks be able to contain him? Will they be able to stop Alexander Stevens, who's having a solid season so far? The Sharks have been hurt by turnovers. They have to get their miscues under control if they hope to be successful in this one. Robert Morris finally got into the win column with their 31-21 win against VMI. Elijah Jackson and Terrence Stevens had great games, scoring 3 touchdowns between them. But they have a tough opponent in 3-0 Youngstown State, who are coming off a decisive victory against the Dukes. Will the Colonials be able to contain Nathan Mays, who is dangerous with his arm and his legs? Unfortunately for Robert Morris, that isn't their only threat. The Penguins have an opportunistic defense that forced 3 turnovers against Duquesne. It is imperative that George Martin and that talented Colonials backfield protect the football. And keep an eye on tight end Matthew Gonzalez. In his 2 games this season, he already had games with 124 yards and 126 yards. It's no surprise that the Colonials offense started putting up many more points after his return. 2-2 Merrimack is coming off an amazing 76-7 victory over Mayfield State. The Warriors offense was clicking on all cylinders, putting up 4 touchdowns through the air and 5 on the ground. This week the Warriors take on 0-3 Lehigh Mountain Hawks. Don't let the Mountain Hawks record fool you. Those 2 losses were against ranked teams. Even though they fell to St. Francis in week 1, they played the Red Flash tough. We'll see if Christian Carter can put up points against the Mountain Hawks. We've seen that if Carter can limit his mistakes, he's dangerous. Both Central Connecticut State and Sacred Heart have off, but they face each other next week in an NEC bout. Until next time, enjoy the action. I'm Scott Glennon with the FCS Whiparound.
In OVC action this weekend, we have number 11 Jacksonville State heading to Austin Peay. Eastern Illinois will host Tennessee Tech. The Tigers of Tennessee State will head to Eastern Kentucky to take on the Colonels. And UT Martin will host Murray State.
Emery Hunt, the czar of the playbook here with your OVC whip around. Don't look now, but the Tennessee Tech Golden Eagles have firmly put themselves in the Ohio Valley Conference title discussion with their impressive 3-1 start to the season. Second-year head coach Dwayne Alexander has done a fantastic job in turning around this program. The Golden Eagles offense has been a big part of the story this year. After barely being able to move the football last season, Tech has averaged 450 yards a game and 36 points a game. Now, the defense is still a work in progress, but so far, so good for the Golden Eagles, and they hope to keep up the good play this week as they travel to Eastern Illinois, their 3rd road game in the month of September.
Hey Patriot League fans, I'm Scott Churchson, and this is your FCS Whiparound for Week 4. So, on last week's show, I said that this past weekend was my birthday, and I was hoping for a little bit of Patriot League love. Only 4 teams were playing, so I was asking for a 3-1 record this week. However, the league went 0-4 last week, with Colgate losing at home to number 12 Maine 35-21, the Crusaders losing to Yale in Connecticut 23-10, the Leopards falling to Albany on the road 36-7, and lastly the Rams losing in the nightcap on the road to the Seawolves 45-10. You guys are still my guys, you guys are still my league though, no matter what. Now, it's time for my weekly offensive and defensive players of the week. Tough choice a little bit on offense, but I'm going with John Gay of Lafayette. The 19-year-old from Pennsylvania rushed for 73 yards and had the team's lone touchdown in the loss to Albany. He also happens to be the cousin of William Gay, who spent 10 years in the NFL, 9 of which were with the Steelers, including their win in Super Bowl 43. On defense, I went with Holy Cross's Jacob Dobbs. The 222-pound freshman had 7 tackles, but also had a sack and recovered a fumble against the Bulldogs. Now going into this week, we are back to a full 7 games on tap. Georgetown takes on Columbia on the road in Tigers' first game at home this year after a 31-14 win last week. The Hoyas, meanwhile, had an off week last week after outscoring their opponents by an obscene 112-3, so it'll be interesting to see how they are coming out of the gate. The Hoya defense has been strong thus far this season after giving up just over 260 yards a game on defense, including a very impressive 132 yards against the passing game, especially since a large lead forces that opponent to open up the passing game a lot more. Now, the Crusaders visit Syracuse. The Orange have had a bit of an up and down season so far and sit at 2-2 after being ranked all the way at 21 after week 1. Since that win, they have given up an average of 52 points a game, which could prove to be a boost to a Holy Cross team that has struggled to put points on the board after 3 weeks. The Crusaders do need to watch for Orange wide receiver Tristan Jackson, who was named ACC Receiver of the Week last week. Fordham is at home against the 1-2 Richmond Spiders. The Spiders' third down defense has been a weak spot for them this season, stopping their opponent on only 48% of third down plays, which I feel will be a factor in an otherwise very evenly matched game. The Leopards take on rival Penn at home in Lafayette's annual homecoming game. Penn took a rough 28-27 loss last week in their first game of the year, while Lafayette continues to search for its first win of the year after 2 straight 3-8 seasons under coach John Garrett. Penn currently leads the all-time series 62-23-4, so let's make that 24 now. Colgate is on the road against 1-0 Dartmouth this week, a Dartmouth team that's won its 10th straight opener this weekend. I'd love to see that running game pick up the pace a little bit because it's averaged only 93 yards a game thus far. A strong running game opens up that passing game, which can burn out a defense in the second half. The Mountain Hawks host a 2-2 Merrimack team that won last week 76-7 and has averaged 43 points a game this season. Now Lehigh is coming off a bye week, so it should give them a chance to put the start of their season behind them, rest up, and come out ready to play this week. I said it for Colgate, and I'll say it here also. Improve that running game, and it'll help the passing game and help get the ball into the end zone. I do want to give Lehigh some serious props in one area, though. They lead all of the FCS in lowest amount of penalty yards, averaging less than 26 penalty yards a game. And lastly, Bucknell has their second home game of the year against Princeton. The Bison had an off week last week and seek their first win against a Tiger team that won their first game last week in impressive fashion 49-7. Bucknell has so far been shut out in the first quarter of all 3 games, so I'd love to see them at least get some points on the board in the first quarter this week. Set the tempo, get some momentum, and get the win. That's all I have for Patriot League FCS Whiparound Week 4. I'm Scott Churchson. Stay awesome.
I'm Alex Maroney with the Week 4 Pioneer League Whiparound. Week 4 did not do so kindly to the Pioneer League as the conference as a whole went 2-7 in out-of-conference play. To quickly recap, Cornell took down Marist at home 21-7. Just 2 total team rushing yards in the game for Marist. Wide receivers Joe Petro and Anthony Alavencia combined for 7 catches and 162 yards in that loss. Dayton dropped a tough one to Duquesne at home 35-31. Dayton tight end Adam Troutman again had another nice week as he reeled in 9 balls for 89 yards and a touchdown in the loss. Dartmouth beats up Jacksonville 35-6. Quarterback Calvin Taylor Jr. adds 106 yards in the air and 87 on the ground in the loss. Truman State blows out Valparaiso 38-7. Sophomore defensive back David Hedba picks up his first career interception in the game. Princeton handles Butler 49-7. The Bulldogs defense allowed 543 total yards to Princeton in this one. Campbell handed Davidson their first loss of the season in a close one, 31-29. The Wildcats took off for 413 yards on the ground, led by Jarrell Sterry's 127 yards and score and Wesley Duggar's 108 yards. Murray State blows out Morehead State 59-7. Morehead State turned the ball over 5 times in this loss. As far as wins go, San Diego gets their first one of the season as they took down Harvard 31-23. Quarterback Reed Sinnett goes for 384 yards and 3 touchdowns, and wide receivers Michael Bandy and Dalton Kincaid go for a combined 11 receptions, 163 yards, and 2 scores. Lastly, Stetson bounces back from their tough loss to take down Western New England 59-28. Quarterback Gavin DiFilippo goes for 300 yards and 5 touchdowns in the blowout. Now let's take a quick look at the standings after Week 4. Marist remains at the top as they still own the only conference win, but a 1-2 record altogether. They are followed by Davidson at 3-1, Dayton at 2-1, and Morehead State at 2-2. San Diego and Jacksonville are next at 1-2 apiece, followed by Butler's 1-3, Valpal's 0-3, and Drake at 0-3. Stetson, despite a 2-1 record, rounds out the bottom with the only conference loss. For Week 5, the Pioneer League only has 4 games slated, but a big conference matchup between Drake and Marist. Drake is looking for their first win of the season and will head to Marist, who will host already their second conference game of the year. For the remaining games, we will have Ave Maria heading to Jacksonville to take on the Dolphins, NC Wesleyan heading to Stetson to take on the Hatters, and Charleston, West Virginia heading to Indiana to take on Valparaiso as the Crusaders look for their first win of the year. For the Pioneer League, I'm Alex Marinoni.
Troy Anthony here, bringing you Football Game Plan's Whiparound for the Southern Conference. The SoCon as a whole has a pretty solid showing in Week 4, going 5-3, and that included an interconference matchup between Furman and Mercer. The Furman Paladins would dominate the Mercer Bears en route to a 45-10 victory. The Bears would have no answer for the Paladins' rushing attack, as they allowed over 400 yards on the ground. Furman running backs Devin Wynn, Corey Watkins, and Devin Abrams all rushed for over 80 yards, with Abrams going for 1 touchdown and Watkins going for 2. With the victory, the Paladins are 17th in the FCS and now tied for the number 1 seed in the conference. The Bears consequently fall to the 4th seed. In their next matchup, the Mercer Bears will host the 2-1 Campbell Fighting Campbells Saturday at 7 o'clock, and Furman will be hosting their next conference matchup Saturday at the 2-2 ETSU Buccaneers, 1 o'clock. The VMI Cadets were looking for their 3rd straight victory of the season, hosting the 0-3 Robert Morris Colonials. The Colonials were not going to let that go down without a fight. They actually never even trailed in the game, as they would defeat the Cadets 31-21. The Cadets had a pretty good outing from QB Reese Udinsky, throwing 274 yards and 1 touchdown, as well as running back Alex Ramsey, rushing for 154 yards and 1 touchdown. The offense began to click just a little too late into the game after being down multiple scores at halftime. VMI is tied for 1st place in the conference and looks to bounce back next Saturday at 1:30 as they host the 1-2 Wofford Terriers. The Chattanooga Mocs played host to number 2 ranked James Madison Dukes this past weekend, and they put up a good fight in the 1st quarter. From then on, the Dukes would roll over the Mocs to a 37-14 victory. The Mocs were held scoreless after the 1st quarter. They obtained 10 first downs for the game, opposed to 30 from the Dukes. The Mocs are now 6th in the conference and host the 1-2 Western Carolina Catamounts Saturday at 4 o'clock. The Citadel Bulldogs' option offense is one to be reckoned with, and the Charleston Southern Buccaneers were just not ready this past Saturday, as the Bulldogs would roll to a 22-13 victory. Once again, the Citadel dominated time of possession, 36 minutes to 24. Quarterback Brian Murdaugh led the Bulldogs in rushing with 76 yards, but Remus Butler would score their 2 rushing touchdowns. At 2-2, the Citadel remain at 25 in the FCS rankings and are 5th in the conference. They visit the 2-2 Sanford Bulldogs this Saturday at 3 o'clock. The Wofford Terriers started off the season 0-2 and were looking to bounce back against Gardner Webb Bulldogs, and boy did they, running away with the game 49-10. The Terriers outrushed the Bulldogs by 480 yards and had 6 scores on the ground, led by quarterback Joe Newman's 155 rushing yards. Wofford earns their 1st victory of the season, but remain last in the conference. They look to change that as they head to take on conference foe 2-2 VMI Cadets this Saturday at 1:30. The Sanford Bulldogs defeated the Alabama A&M Bulldogs this Saturday 55-21. Sanford's offense put on a clinic as quarterback Chris Oladukan tossed 3 touchdowns on 250 yards and rushed for another 95 and a score. Running back Jay Stanton added 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. Wide receiver Montreal Washington would be the big play guy on the day with an 82-yard touchdown reception, finishing with 6 catches for 127 yards. Sanford is now 2-2 and tied for 1st in the conference. Next up, they try to stop that 2-2 option offense of the 25th ranked the Citadel this Saturday at 3 o'clock. After losing last week in overtime, the ETSU Buccaneers would host the Austin P Governors. Trailing into the 4th quarter, the Buccaneers would take the final lead of the game on a 2-yard touchdown from running back Quay Holmes and win the game 20-14. This was a defensive game, as drive after drive would end in either a punt or 3 and out. Defensive backs MJ Woods and Arterius Smith would come up with interceptions in back-to-back drives late in the fourth quarter to ensure no comeback from the Governors. At 2-2, ETSU is 7th in the conference. They visit the 17th ranked 2-2 Furman Paladins this week at 1 o'clock. I'm Troy Anthony, and that wraps up this football game plan whip around for the Southern Conference.
I'm JJ Josephson with your SWAC Whip Around. Jackson State just snuck by late in the fourth quarter with a win 49-44 versus Tennessee State last week, holding on to get their first win of the season, led by running back Jordan Johnson, who had 134 yards and 1 touchdown on 22 carries. Now it's time for the Tigers to focus on Kentucky State and try and make it 2 wins in a row. This is a matchup between 2 teams who both need to win, not only for team confidence, but conference standings as well. 1-3 Prairie View A&M takes on 1-2 Grambling State in their second SWAC game of the season. Last week, Prairie View lost to Alcorn State in a 45-41 shootout where miscues cost the Panthers big time. Prairie View will need to keep the turnovers to a minimum if they want to regroup during the State Fair Classic. Grambling State fought hard themselves in a road loss to Alabama State and look to rebound with a big win of their own. The second annual Gulf Coast Challenge, powered by Mobile Sports Authority, will be held this Saturday between Alabama A&M hosting the Central State Marauders. The 2-2 Bulldogs got slaughtered by Samford last week, 55-21, as they look to have a short memory and go into battle versus a solid Central State team, led by running back Jordan Bentley, who now has 100 rushing yards in his second straight game. They will look to control the line of scrimmage and keep the turnovers to a minimum. As for Alcorn State, the 5-time defending SWAC Eastern Division champions were off to a slow start in the non-conference games. Just a few weeks ago, with its lone win coming in week 2, 45-7 over Mississippi College, until a huge win last weekend versus Prairie View A&M gave them the confidence they need going into this tough SWAC battle. The Braves joined Youngstown State as the only FCS teams to score a touchdown on every trip inside the red zone this season. The struggles for Mississippi Valley State continue as they are still searching for their first win of the season after not showing up again last week in a game they should have won against Bethune-Cookman. This should be an interesting conference matchup between 2 teams who are in a must-win situations to stay relevant in league standings. Southern head coach Dawson Odoms and some of his players met with journalists Tuesday afternoon. As you could tell, they were excited and prepared for this weekend's SWAC Road matchup versus Arkansas Pine Bluff. The Jaguars are 1-3 on the season after a tough 27-21 loss to a good Florida A&M team. The Jags showed fight, coming back from down 17 to take the lead, only to then blow it, letting up a late touchdown, lifting the Rattlers to victory. Arkansas Pine Bluff sits at 3-1 on the season, winning a 37-31 thriller against Tennessee State last weekend on a game-winning 17-yard touchdown pass as time expired. The Golden Lions offense averages 37 points per game, led by a dual quarterback system in Shannon Patrick and Skylar Perry. This should be a fun matchup to watch, a high-powered offense take on a defense that loves to apply pressure and cause turnovers. In my personal SWAC matchup game of the week. Texas Southern is now 0-3 on the season and will have their hands full after a disappointing loss last week versus Incarnate Word, 63-44. TSU did show some positives on the field as wide receiver Trendavian Dixon finally finds a home as he went off for 16 catches for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. Texas Southern will need all hands on deck and try and find a win on the road at Red Hot Houston Baptist. I'm JJ Josephson with your SWAC Whip Around.